Welcome to No More Desire, where we build a mindset and lifestyle for lasting recovery from porn. My name's Jake Castleman, and I'm excited to dive in with you. Let's get started, my friend. PIED, porn-induced erectile dysfunction. I didn't hear about that until my 20s, and it finally explained to me, oh my gosh, that is what has been going on with me. A lot of people think of addiction, and we can understand it kind of from a clinical perspective as, well, how much does it inhibit your day-to-day life? How much of your emotional and mental bandwidth is it taking up? How often are you thinking of it when you're not even engaged in it? Not only how many hours is it taking up, but what of your focus and your day-to-day enjoyment of life?
I was desensitized to more than just sexual stimuli. I was desensitized to all of life. And I started to feel the emotional colors bleed back into my life in the first few months of being porn-free, which was amazing. More confident, more able to take risks, to be ambitious, felt more motivated day to day in my work, more able to get joy out of small things like having a good conversation or enjoying a meal, rather than never being satisfied in the present and always anxious to get to that intense release of pornography use.
Do you ever feel forced to watch porn? Like your urges have you by the throat and they're telling you that you must give in, and no amount of willpower will save you? Do you experience a lack of focus, presence, or zest for life, and you suspect that porn could be contributing to this? Do you experience chronic procrastination and run to digital comforts like porn, social media, or TV when you know you have family or work responsibilities calling your name? This was my story too, my friend. Porn ripped away my confidence. It gave me social anxiety. It made me a slave to sexual urges. It made the rest of my life dull in comparison. I couldn't wait until the lights were out and I could get that next hit, even though inside I felt tortured and disgusted by my own behavior. Inside, I wasn't this kind of person. I wanted more out of life. I wanted to accomplish great things, help people, and I had a good heart. But on the surface, I felt unable to live up to these deeper values. Porn has a way of doing that. It takes our potential and crushes it. That's the primary reason that hundreds of men I've taught come to No More Desire, to learn how to stop needing porn so they can start living again. This story is shared by today's guest, Noah B.E. Church, author of the book Wack, Addicted to Internet Porn, and a fellow porn addiction recovery coach in the space. For over a decade, Noah has helped hundreds of men successfully rewire their brain's dependency on porn, naturally reverse porn-induced sexual dysfunctions, and reclaim the fulfilling lives that they were meant to live. In today's episode, Noah and I discuss the brain science behind pornography addiction and how to rewire your neurology so that you can break free. We both share our personal stories and root causes behind our struggles and how we came out. We talk about the exact ways porn reshapes the brain, the larger life patterns that fuel addiction, how porn distorts men's sexuality and masculine identity, and specific practices you can use to build the recovery mindset and lifestyle so you can shift these patterns, heal these dysfunctions. Before we dive in, a reminder to follow and rate this podcast so that other men who are looking for help can find it. And make sure to hit that notification button so that you can keep finding it. All right, my friend, let's get started. Noah Church, welcome to the podcast, man.
Here I am. Thanks for having me, Jake.
Yeah, it's so good to have you. I'm excited for this conversation. We're going to get really into the neuroscience behind pornography addiction. We're going to talk about masculinity, identity. We're going to talk about how the brain works, all these very crucial matters that so many guys wonder. They don't have answers to. They don't know what's going on with them. And maybe a lot of questions that they don't even know to ask are going to be answered today. So excited, man. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for the work that you do in the space as well. That's why I started this whole thing, was because people weren't talking about it. People weren't aware of the potential dangers of their use of pornography. And culture, by and large, was teaching people that it was normal and healthy, which just
Yeah.
was completely counter to my own experience as someone who grew up with it and later suffered the consequences.
Yes, 100%. Let's start there, actually, man, with your story, what you went through, what led you here. You're working with a lot of guys and have been for years. So yeah, let's dive into what you went through.
Well, I'm 36 now, which means I was growing up as a kid in the 90s when it was becoming commonplace for the American home to have an internet-connected computer. And when I was around 9 or 10, to my best memory, I just had the bright idea on my own to search for, sexual content. And mostly just like pictures of pretty women without their clothes on was what I was looking for in the beginning. And of course, I found that, and I found much, much more that I could not have imagined at that age. And the rush of what I was seeing on the screen and how it was pressing all the right buttons in my brain to get me hooked was, enough to ensure that I would come back again and again for more and more whenever I could get private time with an internet-connected device. And this was before the days of YouTube-like streaming video pornography. So I would be searching for pictures, for stories, and using torrent software to download video files that other people were sharing around the world. And you never quite knew what you were going to get. And it was definitely the Wild West, even more so than it is now, of internet pornography. And looking back, I can tell that I rather quickly, in a matter of months and years, just 2 or 3 years probably, escalated to more and more extreme content. And that's partly because it was just, whether I was seeking it out or not, it was coming across my screen, and my child brain didn't know what to do with that and how to handle that. And I was already in a state of arousal, so my sexuality was becoming wired to ever more extreme pornography. And as I was continuing to use, I was becoming less and less sensitive, because the brain seeks homeostasis and seeks balance. If you're eating sugar every day and candy every day, you become less sensitive to sweetness. And if you're consuming internet porn every day, you become less sensitive to sexuality and feminine beauty, if you're a heterosexual man. And so I would become more and more reliant on the more extreme pornography to maintain my arousal throughout the years as I was becoming a teenager. And that didn't really strike me as a problem at the time. I struggled morally with some of the things that I was looking at, but I rationalized to myself that it was all just fantasy, and that because it was fantasy, it was harmless, so I wasn't hurting anyone, not realizing just how much I was hurting myself. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I actually had a real girlfriend and a real relationship, and we felt we were in love with each other and wanted to have sex. We would each be each other's first time. But when we went to do that, it felt very alien to me. My brain was so used to engaging sexually when I was alone with a computer screen that touching another real person and looking in her eyes and being there in the flesh in a bed with her, there was a disconnect in my brain, and I wasn't able to either get or maintain an erection long enough to have successful sex. And I had no idea what was going on, because this has been something I'd been looking forward to for my whole life and been excited about my whole life. And now that it was here, it wasn't working. And I felt broken. I didn't know how to talk to her about it because I had no idea what was going on. I searched for answers in those early days, but at that time, back in 2008, there was really no online knowledge or stories about sexual dysfunction being connected to pornography use. So I just struggled in the darkness basically for another 6 years until I was 24, when, after multiple failed relationships due to my porn use and the resulting sexual dysfunction, I decided enough is enough. I've got to actually seek help and actually find some real answers and stop running away from this problem and hoping it will just go away. And so I searched again, and luckily enough, by that time, there was more information available. Most notably, there was a TED Talk by the now deceased Gary Wilson of Your Brain on Porn called The Great Porn Experiment. And that was my light bulb moment when he described how many men were coming out online, young guys who were otherwise healthy, not overweight, eating healthy diet, exercising, but struggling to maintain an erection with their real partners. And what they all had in common was years of internet porn use. And even more telling was that after stopping their porn use and after being away from porn for several months, many of them were seeing great improvement and finally able to enjoy sex in their real relationships again. And so that was my light bulb moment, and I immediately swore never again will I use porn and started my own journey. And I ended up breaking that promise to myself because I underestimated the strength of my own addiction. About 8 or 9 months after that, after recovering from my porn-induced erectile dysfunction, PIED, after seeing the reality of just how much it had hurt me, I still went back to it in a moment of darkness because I was addicted. And that's the nature of addiction, is you lose control over your ability to say no when you've realized something is harmful for you. And so it took me another year or so of on and off again sobriety to figure out what I needed to be permanently porn free. And then after that is when I started making videos more than I'd already been, because I had already been sharing what I had been going through, but I started doing more of that, and I started coaching people one-on-one and eventually in groups through porn-related problems like what I'd been through.
I love that you dove straight into that so quickly. Honestly, it took me years to even feel brave enough to begin doing that. And you were actually sharing with people as you were in the recovery process early on, and then dove into coaching men. It was just over a year after you'd had sobriety type thing. Is that right?
Yeah, one of the first things I did after I made the connection between porn and my problems was started journaling. And I just spent 3 days writing and journaling out my whole sexual history and everything I'd been through. And I shared that on an anonymous online forum for men who are struggling with the same thing.
Wow.
A forum that I don't think exists anymore, but seeing other people respond to that and echo my experiences in themselves, it was cathartic for me. And I thought, there's a lot of men out there probably, because I know the majority of young men are using porn, at least to some degree. There's probably a lot of men out there who are feeling alone like I was, and I felt a responsibility to do more. So I started writing a book that I eventually published about 6 months later, self-published, called Wack, Addicted to Internet Porn, and then started speaking out on YouTube and publicly on some stages when I had the opportunity, and snowballed from there.
That's great, man. It's a fantastic story. It's extremely relatable. I think back to my own sexual experiences. That was the same case for me, actually, what you described with your girlfriend. And I come from a Christian background as well, so that was loaded with shame and forbiddenness, like I shouldn't be doing this right now and all that. And I know that was not the same case for you, but there's that whole layer going on at the same time. And I remember being shocked by the fact that I could not keep an erection, and how alien, as you said, it felt as well when you've conditioned yourself for so many years to, I get sexually aroused, right? Your arousal template, so to speak, in front of a screen, right? With myself in isolation, right? With these women that I don't know, and I have no emotional investment at all, right? There's no risk being taken. That's what your body becomes habituated to, right? That's what your body gets used to. And that really shocked me. And I remember 16 years old, I was like, what's wrong with you? Do I have a blood flow issue? I feel like an old man. I don't know what's wrong with me. And that really scared me. And I did not know, again, now PIED, porn-induced erectile dysfunction, I didn't hear about that until my 20s. And it finally explained to me, oh my gosh, that is what has been going on with me for all these years.
Yeah, that light bulb moment. Yeah. It's powerful.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And for you, once you had that light bulb moment, were you able to leave it behind? Or did you also struggle with the addiction?
I did as well. Yeah, it took me actually when I was 17 was when I really decided I want to get rid of this. And it took me 5 years to take all the steps. For myself, it was perfectionism and social anxiety and anxiety. These types of mental and emotional challenges were what really drove the need for the escape using pornography. And it took me years to come to understand the workings of my own mind, the pressures that I felt, the emotional intensity. I was like this all the time. Like I remember I actually discovered that my shoulders kind of like were always hunched, like my traps were tight. And I remember I realized like, oh my gosh, if I've been doing this my whole life. So I was holding that stress up in my shoulders. I had to do everything right all the time and I couldn't take any risks and I couldn't try new things. I remember I wanted to, like somebody even said, you should go out and try track. Like I was like, my body was totally meant for it. And it's like, oh, I could never try that. What if I didn't do well? And all these fears and all these insecurities that were very much underneath the surface, I was completely unaware of. I needed to start to become aware of them and start to work through them. And I noticed as I did that, the need I felt for porn began to dissipate and decrease. I don't know if you experienced that as well, some of kind of what your journey was like in the steps you needed to make to give up porn. What were some of those things?
Yeah, there are so many nuances to any addiction recovery. And I think of the journey of recovery as a second puberty of sorts, where it's more of an emotional puberty because addiction is about finding escape or solace in that substance or that behavior rather than meeting and addressing your real emotional needs. So if you're lonely or you're stressed or you're anxious, you can solve that in a short-term way by using, but you never learn how to sit with those, how to accept those emotions, how to work through those emotions and meet your real needs while you're in that process. So once you take away that option, well, many people start to just move that addiction around. Maybe they start binge eating food more, or they're playing video games all day once they've stopped the porn use. But if you're going through true recovery, you're not just moving that addiction around, you're learning how to handle your own inner emotional landscape as an adult. And it is very transformative and touches every aspect of someone's life. The sexual dysfunction is often the tip of the iceberg that's visible above the waterline, but there's so much more happening beneath the surface that most of the time people don't realize all the ways that pornography and their use of it has affected them until they stop and until they're 3 months, 6 months, a year clean. Like me, I realized I was emotionally numbed for many years of my life. I was unable to cry, unable to feel intense joy, because I was desensitized to more than just sexual stimuli. I was desensitized to all of life. And I started to feel the emotional colors bleed back into my life in the first few months of being porn-free, which was amazing. I also felt more confident, more able to take risks, to be ambitious, felt more motivated day to day in my work, more able to get joy out of small things like having a good conversation or enjoying a meal, rather than never being satisfied in the present and always anxious to get to that intense release of pornography use. And I wouldn't say that I was on the most extreme end. I'd say I'm probably more extreme than the average man in how I use pornography, but certainly not the most extreme. And it didn't get in the way, for example, of my schoolwork. I was valedictorian in high school and did well in college. So I was able to be a functional addict, but it held me back from rising above just the bare minimum that I had set for myself in my mind.
I think it's so crucial what you say there, Noah, because a lot of people think of addiction and we can understand it kind of from a clinical perspective as, well, how much does it inhibit your day-to-day life, right? And to me, I go much deeper with that, which is how much of your emotional and mental bandwidth is it taking up? How often are you thinking of it when you're not even engaged in it, right? Not only how many hours is it taking up, but what of your focus and your day-to-day enjoyment of life. I love that you say to enjoy a good meal, to enjoy a deep conversation, right? To like connecting with people. I found all those things mundane and boring, right? In comparison to pornography, to the intense video games that I was playing, to the junk food that I was eating and the fast food I was eating on a daily basis, right? We have built this, obviously, if you go to Dr. Anna Lemke, Dopamine Nation, right? She talks about how we have this dopamine addicted culture and world, right? The society that we have set up so many things as the ultimate pleasure that we can possibly gain from an experience, from our food to the internet we're engaged in, to the entertainment we're engaged in, and recovery. I know for me, I talk about base versus noble pleasures, right? Choosing to decrease things like obviously porn, but also things like video games or binge watching Netflix or eating all this junk food and everything, to noble pleasures, things that are going to bring meaning and peace to my life, to actually make me feel whole and happy, things that are often more subtle, but they're more meaningful to me as a person. And so recovery requires this shift from what is intense and immediately gratifying to what helps me feel good both now and in the long run. It's good for me rather than just feels pleasurable.
Yeah, pornography is a subset of sex addiction, is porn addiction, but it's also a subset of screen addiction. And for me, that was part of it too. Binge watching TV shows. Thankfully, never got really into TikTok, but that sort of short form content, I think, is the distillation of that problem to its most pure form that we have now. Just as soon as you're bored for an instant, you can swipe to the next thing. And that's how my brain was being trained as I was using the internet, and even more so young people growing up now, because these companies and platforms have been able to crystallize and distill their formula for keeping people hooked and keeping people's attention. And using video games as well. I think the longest period continuous that I ever played video games was like 36 hours at a time, which wasn't normal, but still.
Oh my gosh.
It's like not healthy, right? And a simple framework that helps me better understand my own actions and helps some of my clients is understanding that everything that we do, we're either moving towards something or away from something, and sometimes both as well. And addicts spend a lot of time moving away because they're moving away from the feeling of loneliness, from the feeling that they're not good enough. Maybe they're procrastinating, and they always turn away and choose to either use a screen for sexual purposes or for the feeling of false achievement that video games might give you, or maybe to substances and other things as well. Addiction is all about moving away from what you don't want to face, but moving towards something, toward your values, let's say you have a value of treating your body well, going to the gym to exercise, you're moving towards that value. Choosing to cook a healthy meal of whole foods, you're moving toward that value. And the more choices we can make that move us toward something that we value, the more confident people tend to become, and the less vulnerable to their addictive urges they tend to become.
I love that. And it actually makes me think of, you said this feeling of false achievement with video games. And for me, and there's different ways to see this and different material that's out there, but essentially I like to think of it like we all have a certain bandwidth of emotional energy to expend in a day, right? In a week, in a month, whatever that looks like. If I spend all of this ambition that I have on something that's instantly gratifying and just gives me this feeling, this fabricated feeling of achievement, like, a video game, the levels I move through, the stars that I earn, the points that I earn, whatever that looks like. Well, now all that focus, that bandwidth that I would have for real life experiences is now taken. Now, does that mean I can never play a video game for a half hour with some friends or something? No, but I think it's that scale, right? You said the moving toward and moving away, really being cognizant of what I'm spending my time doing and how that's impacting my recovery and my happiness. And I think I'd love to hear what you have to say on a neuroscience perspective on that, perhaps with dopamine and neurochemicals and other things, if you want to speak to that. But it's important.
Yeah, I would like to clarify that not all activities have to be black and white, like video games. Sometimes maybe you're playing with some friends, or you're playing with a friend that is living across the country, and this is how you bond. And you're moving towards your value of maintaining friendships. And another good question to ask yourself is, how do I feel after doing this thing? If afterward you feel like you still have a smile on your face and you feel closer to your friend and you had a good experience, great. But if afterward you feel empty, or you have this thought of, oh no, I just spent 6 hours doing that, then that's a very important sign. And neurologically, yeah, these things are very good at tapping into our reward system in our brain. And we get that feeling of achievement so much more quickly in a video game than we might in real life, because we literally have like lights flashing, and maybe it'll be level up. We see the progress bar ticking, all these different indicators of achievement that are so much more blatant and in your face and celebratory than real life often is, and much more quick. The next achievement is always right around the corner, keep you going and going. But there's a dissonance, because we're not just our reward system, there are other levels to our consciousness, and we are aware, many of us, that this is not actually moving us toward any of our real values. And that at the end of 12 hours playing this video game, no matter how many hits of achievement and dopamine that we got, we're left with nothing that actually moves our real life forward. And that dissonance can leave a lot of people feeling hollow. And when you're feeling bad and you're addicted to something, or on the way to being addicted to it, you solve that feeling of feeling bad by going back to what makes you feel good in the moment. So maybe you get 4 hours into the video game and you think, oh, I should really work on that essay that's due day after tomorrow. But then you feel so bad that you've already wasted 4 hours of your work time. Oh, I don't want to feel this I don't want to feel this way. I want to feel better. So I'll just play a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And then there's the vicious cycle. And of course, the same thing can be true with porn. With porn, there's the refractory period that can limit that. So after orgasm, a lot of men need some time to recover to the point where they're motivated to go again and to keep going. Some people find ways around that by edging. So that was one of my patterns, is I would edge and push off having the orgasm as long as possible so I could continue having the experience of using porn.
Yep. Yeah, me too.
But we all have some degree of refractory period. And that's why a lot of us, myself included, the porn addiction is part of a greater screen addiction, because I could use porn and then have an orgasm. And then if I wasn't ready to face reality, I could then transition to watching TV or playing video games and continue engaging with the screen addiction, maybe until my refractory period was over, and then I could go from video games back to porn, and it could just be an endless cycle.
Before we get back to the show, I want to take a few minutes to share a story of one of my clients. Because if you're someone who's been battling with porn addiction yourself and feeling stuck, I think that you'll relate to this. My client Gabe came to me discouraged about the impact his porn use was having on his life. It got in the way of his productivity at work, made him feel more distant from his wife and kids, and caused him to experience brain fog, lack of motivation, and a lack of confidence. All things that I relate to deeply and personally. Gabe was a good man. He valued his family, served his community, he had a good job, and he had ambition. He could even get a decent streak of sobriety sometimes, but nothing long-lasting. Gabe's problem was not discipline. It was a lack of knowledge and skill. He didn't understand how to regulate his emotions and train his nervous system properly, so that cravings, anger, and other painful emotions could be moved through effectively. By the time he finished my program, Gabe had 5 months of sobriety without a single relapse. His perspective on life had changed dramatically, and for the first time, he felt fully connected and in harmony with his principles and who he was. I'll share a few of his words directly. I would leave every session with Jake feeling like my eyes had been opened to a new level of understanding that changed my self-talk, my relationship with my spouse, and my ability to connect with my children. The program felt incrementally tailored to my needs, and had the exact building blocks I needed to live a sober lifestyle and mindset. I've kept in touch with Gabe since then. His success has continued, and he is now 7 months sober. Gabe's story is one of many men who've joined my intensive coaching program and experienced sobriety. If you want to join these men, dig deep, and finally be sober for good, head to nomoredesire.com/program to learn more. Back to the show. Yeah, it's again, very relatable, very important. So I want to kind of ask this direct question to shift us a little bit from your experience working with men, Noah, and from your own story. What are you seeing right now when it comes to men's sexual health, their confidence, and what are the common struggles they're dealing with that they don't always talk about openly?
Of course, I have a biased perspective because the people I spend the most time talking to are the people who have realized they have a porn problem and have sought help. So I don't spend time just walking the streets, polling random men to see what their lives are like and asking them questions about this. But among the men that I do talk to, it's something that gets in the way of their relationships, gets in the way of their ambition, their dreams, their daily satisfaction, their ability to be content in the present moment or to live in the present rather than fuming in regret about the past or anxiety about the future. And a lot of them feel powerless because they've already been trying to stop because they have recognized that these activities are holding them back, that they're not moving them toward their values, but they don't know how to stop because many of them walked into this trap when they were an adolescent, when they were 9 years old, 12 years old, when their brain was still in the midst of rapid development. And they walked into this trap that had been designed to be as addictive as possible by people with much older, with more years of experience, because that's good business. And what's more, they were not prepared for that trap, like many of us are prepared for similar traps of alcohol, gambling, cigarettes. We're educated about those things, many of us in school. But still, even after I've been doing this work more than a decade now, I won't say all, because perhaps in some schools they are, maybe in more religious-centered areas like Utah. I know that Fight the New Drug has gotten a lot of success in reaching young people. So hopefully more and more young people will be educated about these dangers, but still the vast majority are not. They might have sex education, but they're not educated during that time about the potential dangers of using internet porn, and they should be.
Yeah. Yes. It's 100% true. And it also, one of the things that I found myself thinking of so much during those years of, as I was trying to recover and I was experiencing some of the benefits of that, my focus was becoming more keen. My motivation was improving. I was enjoying things in life more. I didn't realize how not only porn, but also the hours of video games I was playing, they came just hand in hand for me in so many ways. I realized how much both of them had been impacting me. But as I pulled out of those and I experienced all these improvements, it struck me, why are we not told about this? I had been told, especially again, growing up in a conservative culture, stay away from porn. It will hurt you. It's a sin. I did not hear this will take away from your happiness and satisfaction in all areas of your life. Maybe I did hear that and I just couldn't hear it, right? I didn't understand it as a kid, right? What that would look like, what it would feel like. Because I had heard, porn is addicting. I was actually very unusual in that way. When I was 12 years old, my dad had actually, he taught all around the world about the brain science of pornography addiction. He wrote, he wrote the drug of the new millennium. And so I was educated on the brain science behind it, but I had no idea what it would feel like emotionally. And so his own son, right? You're probably looking it up right now. His own son had this pornography addiction developing in the background that I was hiding, right, and keeping secretive. It was almost as well like, oh man, I mean, I'm the son of a dad who's teaching everybody. I should definitely not tell him about this ever, right? Which was just a totally false way of thinking, because he ultimately was deeply understanding when I did finally come and tell him. But for me, I just had no way of knowing what that would translate to emotionally, that it would cause me to feel more anxiety, more depression, that it would cause me to feel more distant from other people and to not enjoy the things that I enjoyed as a kid, right? The things that actually brought me happiness. All of those things became very meaningless in the face of this thing that was so intense for the reward system.
Yeah.
And
that's why, on top of educating young people about alcohol, we also try to prevent them from getting it. We have laws about that, right, and they can't just walk into a store and buy it. But for a long time, that hasn't really been the case with pornography. There used to be maybe a question that said, are you over 18? You just click yes and you get access. But I think a lot of time, they don't even ask that question anymore. You just immediately get access. And some states, some countries are moving forward in actual age verification to help prevent young people from getting access, which has its own pitfalls and dangers and ways around. There's never going to be a way to keep all minors from accessing porn, just like there's not a way to keep all minors away from alcohol. But I do think we should at least try.
Yeah, agreed. It's very, very impactful to the brain, and impacts our entire society and how people are showing up and what they're capable of and how they connect with each other, what they accomplish during their lives. It's impacting every area of society. So let's break this down a little bit more at a brain level and talk about what porn is actually doing neurologically that makes it so powerful and what makes it different from anything that we've seen historically. We've talked about this some, but maybe we can get down a little more into the nitty-gritty so people can understand what this looks like.
Well, there are 4 addiction-related brain changes that we should talk about. And we see that these same things in pornography use as we see in drug use, for example. The first is sensitization, which is where we become sensitized to the cues that lead to using, right? So some of those can be completely non-sexual in nature from an outsider's perspective. Like it could be the sound of the front door closing when your roommates or your family leave the house and you're home alone. And that becomes a cue for arousal. It could be a room or an environment, like you go into the bathroom with your smartphone and boom, your brain is cued and sensitized to that. It could be an actual pop-up on the screen, an advertisement, or a thumbnail on YouTube that's sexual in nature. And your brain, as someone who's addicted to porn, if you were under an MRI right now, would be lighting up with more activity than someone who is not addicted to porn, even if that cue might stimulate them as well because it's sexual in nature. So you become more sensitized to the cues to use pornography, but you also become desensitized, which is the second change. You become desensitized to the actual experience. So you want it more, but you like it less, is one way of interpreting that, where your desire to do it, the urge to actually act out on that desire, is more powerful than it was when you were not addicted, or than it would be for someone who's not addicted. But the actual experience, you're less sensitive to what you're seeing because you've overwhelmed your brain with sexual stimulation over the years. And that's why a lot of people escalate in terms of what they're looking at, much like someone who might start drinking light beer, and they go to wine, they go to hard liquor, and then maybe go to other drugs, escalating through that as they become more desensitized to what they're imbibing. The same it holds true for the pornography user. And that could be, like me, someone might see that express itself by you're constantly jumping around between different genres, perhaps becoming more and more extreme or taboo as you go. Because when you are in the midst of that experience and already you're sexually aroused, but there's not enough dopaminergic activity in your brain to perhaps maintain the arousal at the level that you want, well, you can introduce other powerful emotions into that, which also floods the reward system with more neurotransmitters. And those powerful emotions don't have to all be positive. They can be shock, they can be disgust, they can be shame. And because you're already in that sexual experience and now you're adding another powerful emotion, it can actually help you in that moment maintain your arousal, become more aroused. And people can become reliant on that over time to the point where even not just even experiencing real vanilla sex, but just watching real vanilla sex, even though they are accustomed to that and that's what they've trained their brain for, it no longer does it for them either. So now they're reliant on the more extreme content. And they might think, this is who I really am. Pornography has revealed that this is what I'm really into. And they start to seek that out in real life, often find those experiences hollow or empty or shameful or not living up to what they hoped it would be from their porn use, their porn consumption. So that's sensitization and desensitization. Then we have hypofrontality, where we can actually see that there's a weakened connection between the part of our brains, the reward center, that immediately processes these cues, like the smell of your mom cooking your favorite meal. That is a cue that your brain interprets, and then you start to salivate and you feel your appetite. Or seeing an image on a screen, hearing the front door click, signaling you're home alone. All of that activates the reward center. But in hypofrontality, we see that there's a weakened connection between that part of your brain that wants to act on that feeling immediately and the part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, that is responsible for longer term thinking, for seeing consequences, making plans, thinking through things rationally. And that's why addicts often describe the experience of hearing their rational voice in their own minds saying, no, I don't want to do this again. Stop. But they're already doing it. They're caught in the rut that their pornography use has carved in their brain, and they're walking toward the computer, or they're going to the bathroom with their smartphone. They're already pulling up the browser and typing in their favorite porn website, even while that part of themselves that knows better is protesting, because that connection in their brains has been neurologically and physically diminished over time. It's basically atrophied because you're training your brain to act on the urges processed by your reward center, rather than stopping, taking a moment, thinking through it rationally first, and then making a decision based on your values. And it's self-reinforcing. And that's why people who've never been addicted to anything often have a hard time understanding the addiction process. They look at someone and say, well, just stop, just don't do it. But they don't understand what the lived experience is like, having been addicted for years and experiencing that hypofrontality and its actual practical effects on your lived experience. And then lastly, we have the dysfunctional stress response, where all sorts of emotions start to lead to the same pattern of behavior of acting out in your addiction. And we've mentioned that before in this conversation. Stress, loneliness, anxiety about the future, maybe insomnia, all these things start to become cues to use porn, and porn starts to become the go-to solution for all of your problems. And that's the combination of all of these things, of course, puts you in a box that's very difficult to get out of as an addict. And that's why so many of us struggle for years. That's why there's so many different addiction recovery programs available, because it's so hard to get over. And if it's a problem you can solve, then you've certainly got a lot of customers. Now, I will say that about porn and pornography recovery, I haven't necessarily seen the amount of clients that I expected to see, or the amount of people buying my book. For example, when I was young 24-year-old man and writing the book, I thought, okay, this is going to sell millions of copies and change the world. That didn't necessarily happen. And I'm not entirely sure why that is, because I see the statistics. I see that the majority of young men frequently use pornography, at least, once a month. And I see the rates of youthful erectile dysfunction have gone from 2% to more 15 to 30% over the last 25 years. And there's only one explanation I can think of for that.
Yeah.
And so I imagine there's still just a lot of people out there who aren't aware that this is the root of their problems.
Yes. Yeah. And that those four steps are so powerful when it comes to, just those four different factors: sensitization, desensitization, uh, hypofrontality, and dysfunctional stress response. Those really nail all that on the head. Um, and I think one of the things that I was thinking about, that really hits home, and that I didn't come to understand till, I don't know what it was, 7, 8 years ago, is how we can become so attached to the painful emotions that are involved with the addiction. Because it blew my mind, how can I hate this so much and feel so ashamed and so terrible? And then coming to understand the brain science, which teaches, as you said, we become addicted in part because of the painful emotions that are involved. They make the experience more intense. They add more emotional weight to the experience. So for me, when I got married to a good woman who I really appreciated and loved, it was shocking to me, and to her for that matter, how attached I had become to the forbiddenness and the shame and the fear as well of myself, of this controls
Yeah.
me, the whole pattern and everything that was involved with the experience of, again, within my culture, committing sexual sin, right? Or this experience of I'm being taken over, I'm doing something that's not good for me, I'm doing something I'm lying about or isolating or hiding. All of that intense emotion, I became very attached to. And I actually had to retrain myself to attach to positive
Mhm.
emotions surrounding sexuality. That shocked me. I did not know to anticipate that at all going into marriage.
Yeah, that's what we call rewiring in the recovery space from sexual dysfunction. You have to not only stay away from porn and allow your brain to recover some sensitivity, but then rewire your brain's sexual responsiveness by practicing intentionally the kind of intimacy that you actually want to enjoy in your life. And that's difficult, and can take time for some people. And a lot of people just want to stay away from porn long enough that they can feel confident sex is going to be great when I actually try it for the first time. And sometimes that is the case, but most of the time you do need some degree of rewiring where you're training your brain. Okay, this is now our outlet for that sexual energy. It's in loving and being intimate with this real person whose eyes I'm looking into and who is looking at me, which is very different from the experience of porn, which is completely voyeuristic. Someone
Yeah.
is looking at you and seeing you, and that is a very vulnerable experience, which is a part of the beauty of sexuality that is completely missing in porn. And
Mm,
many guys think, too, that once they have access to real life sex, once they get married, that porn will no longer hold any power over them because it was just a placeholder for real sex, not understanding that it's so completely different of an experience. And often they find themselves still hooked on porn, still going back to it, even when they have a partner who's willing and able and ready to go have sex with them.
yes, 100%. How do you think our modern culture has really distorted what men believe sex is supposed to be? How has porn distorted that? How has culture distorted that?
That's a big question. And I think porn has a huge part to play in the answer to that question because most people are growing up on either direct exposure to pornography, teaching them about sex, or the secondary consequences. Like a lot of young women, and many of them are also consuming porn, but many of them are not. But they are the secondary recipients of those lessons taught by porn because they're dating guys who are using porn. And those guys are playing out the scenes that they've seen in pornography. And it's dissimilar from, like, one comparison some people have made is like the Fast and the Furious movies. You can watch movies like that and they don't really affect how you drive. But that's because you've seen countless hours of examples of responsible driving, just walking or driving around the world, being in the car with your parents. But most people don't see those examples of healthy sexuality. All they get is the extreme pornified versions of sexuality. And they carry that into their real relationships, and it changes the sexual template of the entire society. And oftentimes leads to distress, especially in those young relationships where maybe they're acting out pornified sexual practices that are rough or disrespectful, and that certainly require conversations and consent beforehand, but you never see that part in porn either. And then they're doing these things to their partners, striking, slapping, choking, demeaning language that they have been taught is sexy, but their partner hasn't had any of those lessons directly, and now you're traumatizing your new partner. And it's sad. It is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It is. It is very, very important. I appreciate you sharing that. So one of the things that I think we don't anticipate or that can be hard to see is how porn use impacts masculine identity and our relationship to sexuality. But again, relationship to sexuality, but broader, our masculine identity. And I'd love to dive into that and the patterns you see. I think more particularly, how is it training a man to see himself, his masculine identity, to see himself as a man? And then what does a man need to shift in order to enter into more healthy masculinity over time?
Well, certainly one thing that had a big impact on me, and this was at least in part from porn, but maybe even from before I consumed porn, I was aware of this at some level, but I had the idea of masculinity and manhood being tied up in the quantity of sexual partners that you were able to have. And that still not sure I've completely shaken that. Like, it still, I think, is a part of my subconscious.
Totally.
And
yes, I hear that.
Yeah, it's definitely reinforced by pornography. Absolutely. And that caused me not to value real relationships, monogamous relationships, like I should have. And I lost women in my life who were great people and I could have had a great relationship with, if not for that, like, nagging in my subconscious that you got to move on, you got to have more partners, have more. And that, I don't think there's ever an end point to that. If I was to just follow that impulse, follow that story, and I just kept going down that path, I probably wouldn't have my family that I have now. I wouldn't have the son that I love very much and that I'm excited to raise and be his father. And I don't know how much of that came from pornography and how much pornography sent that message throughout culture. But I do think that culture is desperately in need of a counterpoint to that. And understanding the strength and beauty of commitment, like committing to a marriage or family, and what you can build with that sort of long-term commitment and the value of that, as opposed to the value of just having multiple partners in casual relationships.
I agree. And I think it's being dismantled at so many levels. Pornography is a really extreme example on how that's training your brain to just seek out partners, seek out sexual experiences simply for the pleasure of it, the personal, selfish desire of it. And then, as you're saying, there are not enough examples now, I think, of really within entertainment, within, what we're seeing on screens, particularly, of good men in good relationships showing up as husbands and fathers. I think we have all these, I think of the sitcoms out there where guys are acting stupid, or they're getting in trouble by their wives all the time. And they're trying to skirt around consequences, or all this stuff that is just, there are not enough really solid examples these days of this is what it means to be a man, right?
Mhm.
This is what it means to actually be happy about who you are, proud of who you are. And again, I think porn plays a role in that, as you're saying, but it's hard to see all the things that are playing a role in that because it's this big, what I say, a conglomerate of a lot of factors that are playing into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, masculinity is something that I've thought about a lot, read about a lot, wondered about a lot, because a lot of times when I think of specific qualities that define masculinity to me, I think, well, I would also admire that in a woman. And
Right.
yeah, sometimes the line
Yeah.
gets blurry. I think it's getting clearer for me now, as a father, seeing the differences in how our instincts cause us to relate to our child. And we've also, my partner and I have read some books that have helped us, I think, better understand each other and how to communicate with each other, which I think reveals that there is truth to what we are reading about the differences in men and women that come naturally to many of us. One of those
Right.
was a classic 90s book called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, which
Right.
which helped us quite a lot to better understand each other. And other work by like the Gottmans, if you're familiar with them,
Oh
John
yeah. Oh
and
yeah.
Julia
So
Gottman.
good. So good.
Yeah, we
Mhm.
read 8 Dates, which guides couples through 8 different dates, diving deep into conversations about things like family, money, religion, values, things that every couple should talk about as they're getting more serious and more committed with each other.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I think one thing that really held me back as a young man was wanting to appear strong, but that desire for the appearance of strength led me to sacrifice my potential for true strength because I wasn't able to ask others for help. I wasn't able to reveal my weaknesses and then thus work through them and overcome them. I was just stuck projecting an image of strength. And
Mhm.
yeah, that's one piece of advice I would give to young men is stop worrying so much about how you look to others and just accept who you are and where you are on your journey. Allow others to help you and give you advice and try not to live in shame for where you are because
Mhm.
we're all on a journey here. None of us is a finished product. And the only way to really move forward into becoming a better version of ourselves is to accept who we are right now.
Amen. I like that. I like that a lot, and it makes me think of something I was just doing a recent podcast episode on. In part was this difference between trying to do things for performance's sake and because of how other people will perceive me, or more particularly within a relationship, with my wife or girlfriend or partner or whatever, and doing something to make them happy, which is, there's merit to that, but instead seeking to do things because that's the kind of man that I want to be. That's the kind of person that I want to be. This is how I want to show up. And I think there's such a balance in that, like you're saying, of recognizing where I'm at now and accepting where I'm at now in that journey and what I'm trying to become. Not because someone else told me to, or because I think that that's their idea of me, but because this is the ultimate person I want to be, right? And really seeking for that. We're never going to strike it perfect. We just aren't. But that plays right into recovery, I think, because it is ultimately an identity issue in so many ways of I'm not good enough, I feel rejected, I don't feel worthy of happiness, right? I don't feel worthy of good, genuine connection. And we carry that from a lot of us from childhood, and then it becomes the pornography addiction that we
Mhm.
that we get into. It's very hard to perceive that. It took me, again, as you were saying, going through multiple years of recovery to really start to see, whoa, I carried a lot of stuff for a lot of years that led me to escaping through that,
Yeah.
seeking out emotional closeness and intimacy through a fabricated means through porn, which just ultimately left me feeling more empty every time.
Yeah, that's definitely a part of the journey is unpacking whatever childhood stuff you haven't worked through that's still waiting there, and it's getting bigger and darker and scarier the longer you push it off and don't face it.
Right.
But once you start facing it, you realize it's not as big and dark and scary as you feared that it was most of the time. And by chipping away at it one piece at a time, you can make remarkable progress and grow into that man that you want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, in kind of that same vein, I want to ask, why can quitting porn, maybe even from a brain science perspective, but also, just a psychological or personal perspective, why can quitting porn feel like losing something important, even when we know it's hurting us? And what do you think most guys misunderstand about their relationship to porn, right? And how that grieving process, I would say they have to go through, actually.
Well, I like that word you use, relationship, because I often relate one's porn addiction to a toxic romantic relationship. And you probably know people who have had toxic relationships in your life. And from the outside, it's pretty easy to see that's not working
Right.
very well. This does not have good long-term potential. This is hurting you and maybe both of you. And it has certain red flags like on again, off again. Like you realize, this just isn't good for me. You break it off, but then over time, maybe a week, maybe a month, maybe 6 months, the lowest of the lows, you forget the pain of all the experiences you had with that person. And then the highs start to glow brighter in your memory. And then one of you reaches out to the other, and then you rekindle it and you're back together, and it feels great for a moment. But over time, especially the more you get back together, the rarer those high highs become, and the more frequent and constant the low lows become. And it's difficult to let go because our brains are primed to pair bond and to keep us glued to each other when we bond with someone and we build a relationship like that, even when it's toxic. And it's difficult to move beyond that. It's difficult to truly sever those ties and move on. And your brain is doing the same thing with pornography. Even though it's not a real person, your brain is kind of bonding to it in a similar way because you are having a sexual experience with that entity of porn. And it's that pattern that I see reflected in the addiction recovery process when someone relapses, when someone has gone for a month and they've been feeling great, but then in a moment of weakness, whatever glow of that past experience with porn or the promise that porn holds of, maybe there's something so new and so wonderful that's been produced since you've not been using porn that's going to be the thing that's going to finally bring you true satisfaction. And of course it never does. But in that moment, if you don't have your defenses prepared and your environment conducive to your goals and your values, it can push you back in that direction. And yeah, it is difficult, but it's also possible to recover. I do think of addiction as a lifelong thing. And that means that wiring is always going to be in my brain. And if I open up that door to using porn again, I will very quickly reactivate all that wiring that's now dormant in my brain and have those urges again, and even quickly bring back the erectile dysfunction, because it can take years to develop that for the first time, but it doesn't take long at all to bring it back after you've healed it and then relapse. And I don't often get urges anymore, and most things don't trigger me anymore. So I'm not fighting my addiction day in, day out, but I do have to be aware that danger still exists. And if I get completely complacent and think, I'm just cured, I don't have to worry about that ever again, I could step right back into that trap again. And that's something that I encourage people in recovery to be aware of.
Yeah. And it's, for me, recovery mindset and lifestyle is what I just preach all day long. And it's, how are your daily habits set up? How do you handle and regulate emotion? Right. For me, I just as you say, there's always this kind of danger in the background. And that used to really bother me for the first several years. I became obsessed with that. Actually, I can't go that direction. I have to do everything right in my life to make sure that I'm not vulnerable. And I realized how my recovery needed to shift to light and positivity and this hope of who what I wanted and who I was and the life I wanted rather than this avoiding. But, you know, for me, it's once I set up that life of recovery, I have my morning routine that I have of doing things for my spirit, mind, and body. I keep those habits solid. I have for 10 years. I tell people I've missed 2 days in the last 10 years. And they're like, that is so much discipline. How do you do that? And it's like, I just had to. Like, I was desperate to feel okay. I was so miserable. I just eventually, it took me 5 years to finally make that commitment. Look, it doesn't matter what kind of day I'm having. It could be a really crappy day. It could be a really awesome day. It was often on the awesome days that you'd say, well, everything's great. So I don't need to keep up my habits and do those things. But no matter what kind of day it is, I just keep those habits going, right? And they've shifted over the years what they look like and the form they take. But I continuously do those things that help me stay grounded. They help me feel good, right? They help bring me peace and happiness. Because even if that day ends up going really, really poorly, I still have that baseline of what's keeping me grounded and helping me feel okay,
Yeah.
So I tell guys, it's not about stopping the behavior. It's about all the things that you're continuing to do, that you keep doing, right?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And that habit of whatever habits work for you, whatever disciplines work for you, like filling up your life with those things and reminders of what you're moving toward and what you're moving away from with pornography and your past addiction and all the pain that it caused. It's important to keep those things present in your mind in some way. And you and I, that's built into our lives and our careers that we're talking about this stuff all the time. Other people, sometimes I recommend they have a little letter that they write to themselves and they read that to themselves each day that reminds them of their values and what they're moving towards and what they're moving away from with the addiction and all of the pain that it caused them. But that is, I think, an advantage that addicts have who are in recovery, is that they have that extra motivation to live their best life every day because they know how far they stand to fall if they don't.
Yes, exactly. I agree. It brings a whole deeper awareness. It's something that I would wish on nobody, right? But at the same time, it really reinforces who I want to be, how I need to show up, what I need to continue doing each day. Because about the past, about what occurred. And I really like that you said, we can get this kind of delusional thinking when we've been sober for, say, 3 months, right? And I know early on I had multiple experiences where I'd be sober for 3 months and I'd relapse, sober for 3 months, relapse, even 6 months. I made it to a year and I relapsed. And I realized, just those lies that your mind comes up with. It's like, well, was it really that bad? Like, I'm actually pretty happy. So I don't know if it was really that bad.
Yeah.
I don't remember that it was that bad. And I'm like, I just not believing those. I don't know that there's another way to say it. It's kind of labeling them, right? That's conditioning. Yes, my mind's going to come up with these things. Yes, it's going to tell me those things. I totally see that. This is just part of the addictive conditioning, I want to kind of wrap up with one question, Noah.
Shoot.
A lot of guys, I know from how I felt and how a lot of guys can feel, it's okay. I engaged in this from a young age, for yourself. I believe it was age 9 that you had your first exposure, right? What does this do to long-term sexual development? And what hope do we have of rewiring, right? And actually beginning to reconnect in a healthy way again with our partner, our spouse sexually, right? What do we need to be aware of, right? From how that's impacted us and what's possible for guys.
Well, all those brain changes that I talked about earlier, the sensitization, desensitization, hypofrontality, dysfunctional stress response. The beautiful thing about the human brain is that it is able to grow and change and adapt throughout our lifetimes. And all of those things are reversible. And in recovery, your brain can change and can adapt and can rewire to new experiences of healthy sexuality in real life. And everyone I work with who is able to overcome the addiction part of it and actually stop their pornography use is able to see massive improvements over time in their sexual expression in real life and feeling good about and satisfied by the sex that they're having with their real partners that they love. So there's a lot to hope for, a lot to be optimistic about. You didn't doom yourself to a lifetime of unhealthy sexuality, even though you stepped into that trap at a young age. Now, at the same time, there are things that have changed in your brain that will always be there. You can't erase the past. You can't erase the memories of what you've seen or erase the wiring for that behavior entirely. But it can become dormant and you can wire new pathways into your brain. And I will never know what my sexuality would be like or what my relationships would be like if I had never accessed pornography. I don't know. But I can say that I'm living a great life now and I have a great relationship now. And that's good enough.
Yeah. Well said, man. Because I think it can sound like I don't want to, the word I'm not looking for is hopeless. There's a better word. It could sound discouraging, right? When because I've told guys the reality of this, that you will always carry that. But like you're saying, it can diminish and become dormant, right? But it's just always being aware it's there. And you can form new wiring, right? A new structure of habits, a new schemas and perceptions to have a very healthy, happy life and mind, right? And I think with this comes a real reality of just self-compassion and self-understanding. When these thoughts do come up or you have these images emerge or whatever that looks like, or these fantasies, and just bring awareness to it. Oh yeah, look, that was something I dealt with from when I was young. My mind developed around that. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have to let it lead either, right? I'm reforming a new life. It's okay that it's there, right?
Yeah, and it's not your fault that you walked into that trap at a young age when you were not warned about it or educated. It's your responsibility now as an adult to work through that and to seek a healthier life, but you don't have to sit in shame about it.
Mm-hmm. So well said, man. I think that's a perfect note to wrap up on. If people want to work with you, Noah, if they want to get resources or help from you, where should they go?
Go to my website, addictedtointernetporn.com, or find me on YouTube, Noah B.E. Church.
Yes, fantastic YouTube channel. By the way, it's taken years to develop that. So a lot of good resources on there for guys. Appreciate so much what you're doing, Noah. Your knowledge within brain science, everything that you're sharing from a neurological perspective, and the hope that you're giving guys, they can rewire their brain, rewire their relationships, truly heal and get better. And all the guys that you're helping all over the world.
Thanks for what you're doing here with this podcast.
Thanks for listening to No More Desire. It's a genuine blessing for me to do the work that I do, and I wouldn't be able to do it without you, my listeners, so thank you. If you've enjoyed today's episode, do me a favor. Follow this podcast, hit the notification bell, and shoot me a rating. The more people who do this, the more men this podcast will reach. So take a few minutes of your time and hit those buttons. And if you want to take your sobriety to the next level, check out my free workshop, The 8 Keys to Lose Your Desire for Porn, or my free ebook, The 10 Tools to Conquer Cravings. These are specialized pieces of content that will give you practical exercises and applied solutions to overcome porn addiction. And you can find them at nomordesire.com. As a listener of the No More Desire podcast, you are part of a worldwide movement of men who are breaking free of porn to live more impactful, meaningful, and selfless lives. So keep learning, keep growing, and keep building that recovery mindset and lifestyle. God bless. Everything expressed on the No More Desire podcast are the opinions of the host and participants, and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of a qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.